Welcome to Crime Era, where the darkest secrets of crime are uncovered and the hidden truths of criminal underworlds come to light. There are stories that begin with hope, stories that speak of freedom, of justice, of the promise of a better world. But some of those stories twist in the shadows. They begin with a dream that burns too brightly, consuming everything it touches. This is one of those stories. Before the jungles of Guyana, before the name Jonestown was whispered with horror, there was a boy, lonely, searching, desperate to belong. Jim Jones was born in rural Indiana in 1931, into poverty and isolation. He was the child of a broken home, often left to wander the fields alone, lost in thoughts that few understood. Neighbors would remember him as a strange child, fascinated by religion and death, by sermons and funerals. He mimicked preachers, held ceremonies for animals, and spoke of destiny. Even as a child, he saw himself as chosen, a savior among the blind. That need to matter, to be worshipped, took root early. As he grew, America was changing. The 1950s were a time of tension, race, faith, and fear. Jim Jones saw opportunity in that chaos. He discovered something powerful. People wanted to believe. They were hungry for community, for belonging, for someone to tell them they mattered. And so, he began to preach. In small halls and dusty churches, he spoke of equality, of a world without racism or division, of love that knew no bounds. He quoted scripture but twisted it, shaping it into a mirror of his own ambitions. He preached that all men were brothers, that all were welcome. And they came, the poor, the outcast, the dreamers. He embraced them when society would not. The people called him Reverend Jones, a man of compassion. But behind the pulpit, something darker stirred. Jim Jones had studied the art of influence. He devoured books on psychology, socialism, and power. He understood that control was not taken by force. It was given willingly, one surrender at a time. He tested loyalty through small acts of obedience. A lie told for him, a secret kept, a rule broken in his name. Each act, a thread binding follower to leader until the web was complete. By the early 1960s, he founded the People's Temple, a movement born of ideals but built on control. He promised healing and hope, and he delivered miracles, or so it seemed. Sick bodies rose, pain vanished, tears turned to laughter, yet much of it was illusion. Carefully staged performances. Scripts whispered behind curtains. Theatrics disguised as divine power. But to his followers, it was real. He had shown them a world that felt alive, meaningful, they didn't care if others doubted. They knew he was their deliverer. What Jim Jones understood, and what made him dangerous, was that faith and fear are not opposites. They are partners. He learned to intertwine them until his followers could not tell the difference. He taught them that doubt was sin, that leaving him meant leaving God itself. And once that seed was planted, obedience became devotion. By the 1970s, the People's Temple had grown into thousands. The sermons became performances, fiery, dramatic, filled with shouts of revolution. He began preaching not only of heaven but of America's corruption. Racism, capitalism, greed, he called them the true evils. He positioned himself as the only answer. They won't save you, he'd thunder from the pulpit, but I will. I will build a world where no one goes hungry, no one is left behind. The more he promised salvation, the more his followers gave him everything: their time, their money, their families, their faith. But behind the scenes, Jones was unraveling. His sermons grew erratic. His drug use intensified. He began to speak of conspiracies, the government, the CIA, the world plotting against him. Every question, every doubt, became an act of betrayal. To his followers, that fear only reinforced his message. If the world was against them, then he must be right. Their isolation became proof of their righteousness. Psychologists later called it the echo chamber of belief, when reality bends to protect the story you want to believe. Jones had created a perfect loop. Fear fed faith, and faith erased fear. He began moving his followers frequently, from Indiana to California, searching for safety, always claiming persecution. Each move stripped away more connections to the outside world. By the time they arrived in San Francisco, the temple was a machine. Thousands of members, a hierarchy of loyalty, and an ever-watching eye. Those who left were shamed. Those who stayed were praised as the chosen. Letters were censored, phones monitored, confessions recorded. And yet, to the faithful, the People's Temple still felt like home. It was the one place they were seen, accepted, part of something larger than themselves. That is how control works, not through chains but through love. Through the illusion of choice. By 1977, Jim Jones declared that America was doomed. He told his followers the country would fall to fascism, that they were targets because of their ideals. There was only one escape, a place far from the reach of oppression, where they could live free. He called it Jonestown. It was to be paradise, a socialist Eden in the jungles of Guyana. Families sold everything they owned, packed their bags, and boarded planes, smiling through tears as they waved goodbye to the world they'd never see again. To them, it was salvation. To Jim Jones, it was something else entirely: isolation, total, absolute control. When they arrived, they found dense jungle, mud, and heat. Wooden huts, crude paths, endless work. The paradise they had imagined was more like survival. But they told themselves it was worth it because Jones said it was. Because suffering, he told them, was proof of faith. He spoke to them through loudspeakers day and night. His voice echoed across the trees like a god in the clouds. There was no longer a church, there was only the word of Jim Jones. It was here, deep in that jungle, that belief hardened into obedience. That dreams became doctrine. That the boundaries between love and fear finally disappeared. And so, under the humid sky of Guyana, a new world began. One built on faith, sealed by fear, and destined to end the way all illusions do, not with revelation, but with ruin. The jungle never slept. Night after night, a humid darkness pressed against the small wooden cabins of Jonestown. Cicadas chanted in waves, and above them another rhythm carried through the trees, the voice of Jim Jones, humming through tin loudspeakers like a restless god unwilling to let his followers dream. "Good night, my children," he would say, voice cracked but commanding. "Remember, they want to destroy us, but we will never let them." Sleep was no refuge. Every whisper, every doubt, might be overheard, written down, reported. The promised paradise had become an outpost of fear, sealed off from the world by rivers, forest, and devotion. By 1978, the People's Temple in Guyana had become a community of nearly 1,000. To outsiders, it looked like a bold social experiment. Self-sufficient, racially integrated, dedicated to equality. But within its borders, the rules were absolute. Every schedule, every meal, every prayer was dictated by Jones's voice. Letters home were edited, sometimes rewritten entirely. The line between faith and surveillance had vanished. He had created a world that revolved around him. The sermons, the music, even the laughter. When his followers worked the fields, they sang his slogans. When they ate, they gave thanks to him. Their children drew his face in schoolbooks. To question him felt like betraying family, betraying purpose. Jones's paranoia grew heavier each day. He told them foreign powers plotted to invade, that spies hid among them, that the air outside was poisoned with hatred. He said death in his service was nobler than life in the world's corruption. And when you hear that message every hour of every day, the edges of reality blur. Those who still doubted tried to hold the old world in memory. A parent back home, a photograph, a name whispered at night. But hope was a dangerous secret. Jones used confessions as theater. Followers stood before the community, admitting their flaws, their temptations to leave. Tears were met not with comfort but applause, the kind that shames the hesitant into surrender. Even compassion became a weapon. He reminded them of the hungry children they had once seen in American slums, of the prejudice they had escaped. "Would you abandon these brothers and sisters?" he asked. Guilt became the lock. His voice, the key. 3. The outside world looks in. Meanwhile, families back in the United States were writing letters to newspapers, senators, anyone who would listen. They wanted proof their loved ones were safe. Stories of beatings, shortages, Punishment flights began leaking out through defectors who managed to flee the compound. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit. He believed in seeing the truth with his own eyes. For Jones, it was a nightmare made real. The outside world had found him. The day Ryan's group landed, the settlement put on its brightest smile. Children sang, workers danced, cameras rolled. Jim Jones greeted them like honored guests, though his eyes flickered with suspicion. He knew that smiles can hide fear, and fear can turn quickly to rebellion. That night, the visitors gathered testimonies. Some followers begged to leave, others defended the commune fiercely. Jones paced in his cabin, whispering to aides, the weight of his own creation pressing down. Control, once absolute, was slipping. When several members asked to depart with Ryan, Jones's mask cracked. To him, defection was betrayal, proof that the world's enemy forces had infiltrated his paradise. He told the crowd the visitors would destroy everything they had built. Fear spread faster than reason. In the following hours, chaos unfolded at the small jungle airstrip. Shots were fired, lives were lost. Back in Jonestown, Jones seized on panic like a final sermon. He told his people that the end had come, that enemies would descend upon them and torture their children. He offered a way to escape. No one can know the exact thoughts in those last moments, only that faith, fear, and exhaustion merged into one terrible obedience. Some pleaded, some comforted others, some prayed aloud for deliverance. Jones's voice filled the settlement until even silence obeyed him. When the jungle grew quiet again, the dream of Jonestown ended. Rescue teams would arrive to find a scene the world would struggle to comprehend. In the United States, headlines screamed of mass suicide. But beneath those words lay something more complex. Not madness alone, but the culmination of psychological captivity. Experts would later study the case for decades. How love became loyalty, how loyalty became fear, how fear became obedience unto destruction. Jonestown became a symbol, a warning carved into history. The story of Jim Jones is not only about religion or politics. It is about the human need to belong, the hunger for certainty in uncertain times. Jones understood that need intimately. He wrapped idealism around his followers like a warm blanket until they could no longer tell warmth from fire. He used confession to erase privacy, exhaustion to dull resistance, repetition to shape belief. Every element, song, sermon, work, reinforced his narrative. He didn't demand obedience, he trained it. And once people built their identity around him, losing him meant losing themselves. That is the secret of every manipulative leader. They don't conquer with threats, but with belonging. When obedience feels like love, resistance feels like betrayal. Years later, the name Jonestown still carries an echo. Not just of tragedy, but of questions humanity keeps asking. How does devotion become destruction? Why do intelligent, good-hearted people follow someone into the dark? The answers are uncomfortable, because they point not to monsters, but to mirrors. Each of us has the capacity to crave certainty so deeply that we stop asking questions. Each of us can be drawn to a voice that promises safety in exchange for surrender. Jonestown's legacy is not only in the loss, it is in the warning. Belief, unchecked, can eclipse reason. Faith, when bound to one man, can drown truth itself. Imagine the jungle now, the wooden signs fallen, vines wrapping around what remains. Rain falls softly where sermons once thundered. Nature, indifferent and eternal, reclaims what fear had stolen.